Okay, in this video I'm going to very quickly demonstrate the process of taking a bitmap image from Google Images, tracing it, and then importing that vector-based image from Illustrator into Animate. So the first thing you need to do is find a bitmap image that you're going to trace. So I've done a search here for the Quicksilver logo, and then all I'm going to do is simply save this image to my desktop. You'll see I've got a folder there called Animation. So I'm saving it in there, and then I'm going to bring that into Illustrator. So I've finished with Chrome. So here I am in Illustrator. You can see I've just started with a blank document. It's CMYK, and I know I like landscape, but it really doesn't matter what format it's going to be in. Then you're going to go to File, and you're simply going to choose to Place right here, halfway down the File menu, and we're going to browse and find that file that we downloaded. So it was on my desktop in Animation. There's the Quicksilver logo. Once you've done that, you'll see you'll get this little drag and drop box. So I'm going to hold down my mouse and drag, and you'll see that I'm going to fill the screen with the Quicksilver logo there. You can place that onto the page, and then once you've done that, just simply click so that it's not selected. Then I'm going to come across to the Layers palette, and I'm going to lock that layer. Eventually what I'm going to do, you can see here in the Layers window, at the moment I've pushed the padlock to lock it, is hide that completely, and I'm going to be left with just my vector-based tracing of that. Then I'll need a new layer that I can start to draw on. So here I've got layer 1, which is my image I'm going to trace, and layer 2 where I'm going to actually do my tracing. I'm going to choose the pen tool for my tracing, and then you'll see what I'm going to do. The secret to tracing is just to click the important points around the image for the trace, and then to go back and fine-tune them. So you can see here I've got a curve, and at this point here it's going to change the direction of the curve. So that will be my second point in when I click. So I'm going to start down here, and I'm simply going to check on my layer 2, and then I'm going to click. I'm going to click at the midpoint of that curve, and then I'm going to click at the top of that curve, and you'll see those two straight line sections are what I'm going to turn into the curve later on. I'm now going to click on the tip of this point, halfway along this main curve, and then the bottom of the main curve, then straight along the arm of the logo, down at the point of the logo. Once again, you can tidy this up later. The tip of the curve, and then the top of the curve, and then I'm closing my path. Once you've done that, we're going to modify some of these anchor points. So I'm going to then choose the anchor point tool. You can see that's hidden underneath the pen tool. I like to often tear this off, and that way you'll get floating tools that you can use. So you can switch very quickly between the pen tool and the anchor point tool. The other thing I'm going to do actually before I do that is choose the selection tool, and I'm going to select this shape, and instead of doing it in black and white, I'm going to get rid of the fill. So you can see I've got no fill now, and I'm going to change the stroke line from black to something that I'm going to be able to see when I do the tracing. So if I trace in black, I'm not going to be able to see the black compared to the black of the logo. So I'm going to trace it in yellow just to make my job a little bit easier. And then I'll close the color palette. Okay, then I'm going to modify my anchor point tool. And in order to modify these anchor points, you simply click on the anchor point that you're wanting to modify, and then if you drag away from that anchor point, it's going to adjust that anchor point into a curve. So you'll see when I click and then I drag that those handles are now dictating the angle of the curve around that point, and I'm just moving my mouse to move the top anchor point. So I'm just going to worry about the top of the curve, and so you can see there I've got the top of the curve nice, and the bottom of the curve is pretty good as well. Once you've done the top of the curve, you can switch to the bottom handle, and you can adjust that curve so that it even better matches the bottom curve. So you can see I'm now only adjusting the bottom half of the curve. And so you can play around with that until you're happy with the curve. My next big curve is this long one through the middle. So I'm going to click on the middle anchor point, simply drag out, and I'm only worrying once again about the top of the curve, and I'm getting that to a point where I'm reasonably happy. So somewhere around there. Now if you click on that anchor point, you can see my anchor point was slightly off the middle of the curve. So I'm going to click and move it up a little bit, and then I'm going to try again. I just moved it using the arrow keys, And so now you can see I'm getting closer to that curve. And then I'm worrying about the bottom half of the curve and simply dragging that in to match the curve. Then I'm going to finalize my wave part of my Quicksilver logo by just adding this final curve along the bottom. And so you can then see I've got a pretty good vector-based animation for the Quicksilver logo. Then we repeat the process. I'm now going to do the snow. Actually, I'll do the mountain first. So I'm going to click on the corner of the mountain, click on the point where the curve starts, click on the point where the curve finishes, click on the tip there, then come across to the bottom of my mountain and close my curve. And then we'll choose our Modify Anchor Point tool and add the curves. So I'm going to drag this curve in, and if you want to get rid of a handle, you can just simply click on it, and that way it's a straight line. You can see this curve here is now just the bottom half of the curve. And then I'm going to add that top portion of curve, just worrying about the top portion, and clicking to get rid of that bottom handle. And so that way I've now got my curve through the arc. Now I'm going to put in the snow section. So I'll choose once again my pen tool, and I'm going to click on the start of this curve, the finish of that curve, the start of the curve and the finish of the curve, that point, start and finish of the curve here, start and finish of that curve, that point, start and finish of this curve, and then close. Then I choose my modify tool, and I'm simply going to add in the top half of the curve and then get rid of the bottom part of the curve. Add in the curve and get rid of the bottom part of the curve. Add in, wrong way, too far, that top section, get rid of the bottom, and then I'll just drag out there and get rid of that section. If you are unsure, you can always zoom in on a section to help you out. Okay, it looks like I need to move my anchor point here a little bit, so I'm going to click there and drag that up a little bit. And then click and drag to get the curve, and click on that top anchor point to make it a straight line. And then I might actually add that top curve there too. Okay. Alright, so now we've got the elements of our logo. You can see I can zoom back out and I can hide the bottom layer, and I'm just left with the elements of the logo, and so that way I can see whether or not it works together. Now we're going to take this to Adobe Animate, and we're going to animate these different things. But in order to do that, what I want to do first of all is put the different parts onto separate layers, so that when I animate them in Adobe Animate, it's going to be a little bit easier. So to do that, I'm going to add 2 more layers, and then I'm simply going to get each of those paths I've created and drag them onto one each of those layers. So this bottom layer here is the wave, and so I'm then going to double click on it and rename it wave. Layer 3 is the mountain, so I'm going to double click on it and rename it mountain. And then layer 4 must be the snow, so I'm going to double click on it, rename it snow. And then I'm not actually going to use this bottom layer anymore, so I'm going to delete it altogether. Click on it and then go to the bin, and yes. And so now I've got a layer for my wave, a layer for my mountain, and a layer for my snow. I'm then going to save this, and I'll save it to my desktop once again. And put it in the animation folder, and we'll call it Quicksilver. Okay, and okay. So this is now saved as Quicksilver AI on my desktop. Now I'm going to jump across to Adobe Animate, and we're going to start a new blank animation document here. So we're going to choose to create a new document. It'll open up with asking you what type. We're just going to stick with HD as our type, and then we're going to say create. Now you could do HTML5 animation, you could do all sorts of animations in here. I'm going to save this straight away, so I'm just going to save this as desktop. Oh, there we go, I've got a shortcut, and we'll call it as Quicksilver. silver animation, and there we go. Now I'm going to import that Illustrator file that I've saved. So you simply go to File and you choose Import, and we want to import the objects to the stage. So we choose Import to the stage, find the file. There's my Quicksilver AI file. We say open, and it will then prompt you with what do you actually want to import from that file. So here you go, you can see it's red, the layers. It's got the snow layer, the mountain layer, and the wave layer, and all of those have got a path on them. You can then see you've got a choice as to what you want to actually create them as. Animate layers, a single animation layer, or keyframes. We're going to stick with animation layers, and then you've also got the option here as placing objects at their original position, or just unticking that and just placing the objects on the stage. Then we're going to choose to import, and so you can see it's now got my 3 objects imported here, and down here we've got our mountain and our wave, and where's my snow? And there's our snow as well, so it was hiding up a little bit. Now we're going to actually convert these to symbols so that we can animate each of these. So at the moment they're in, they've just come in as paths, but now we're going to right click on them and we're just simply going to say convert layer to symbol, and we're going to give them the same name as their path. So we're going to call this one snow, and actually we'll leave it as a graphic. Then we're going to right click on mountain and we're going to say convert it to a symbol, and we're going to call it mountain. Then we're going to right click on wave, we're going to convert it to a symbol, and we're going to call it wave. So now we've got 3 symbols on our screen. We want our animation to last for 3 seconds, and you can see down here it plays at 30 frames per second. So what I'm going to do is come across to frame number 90, and I'm going to click on frame 90 there on the snow row. Then I'm going to hold down the shift key, and you can see that I can click on the mountain row as well and the wave row, and it selects all 3 frames for all 3 objects. Then I'm going to right click on those 3 frames and I'm going to say I want to convert these to a keyframe. Now a keyframe is a picture of what the animation should look like at this point. And so we've got a keyframe that's set up by default here at frame number 1, and then we've said that at frame 90 we want it to look the same. Then we're going to go halfway along the timeline to frame number 40, and we're going to select frame 45 for the snow, select holding down the shift key, frame 45 for the mountain, and select frame 45 for the wave, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to right click and we're going to say we want to convert these to keyframes. And so you can see I've now got keyframes that say what the image should look like at frame number 1, what they should look like at frame 45, and what they should look like at frame 90. Now we want the start and the finish of our animation to be the same. So the one we're going to actually edit is frame 45. And so here what we're going to do is on frame 45 we're going to pick up our objects and we're going to move them to different locations around the screen. And you can even rotate or move if you use the transform tool. You can change the size of things. And so you can see at frame 45 we've got it looking like this. Now if you jump to frame 90 you can see it looks the same as it did, and if you jump to frame 1 you can see it looks the same as it did. Frame 45 they're all over the place, they've moved to different locations. If you click now on frame 20 you'll see that it's still copying the keyframe from frame number 1, but you can right click on this object and you can say create a classic tween. Now you'll remember from Photoshop that a tween is where the computer automatically calculates the frames between 2 other frames. Because we've got two key frames, when we say create a classic tween, you'll see that it's now created a tween between frame 0 and frame 45, and the snow has started to move. And so everything else is staying the same because those keyframes haven't been told to move yet. It'll go out to frame 45 and then our image will just stay there, but when we get to frame 90 it's going to jump all the way back to the original position. So what we're now going to do is click somewhere in the middle between frame 45 and 90. We're going to right click on this section of the animation and we're going to do the same thing. Say create a classic tween. And so now our mountain is from frame 0 through to frame 45 moving out to our keyframe, and then from frame 45 through to 90 it's going to move back to its original position. Now we can do the same on our other objects. So we're going to go to our mountain, right click and say create a classic tween, and then find this section here and once again say create a classic tween. And so our mountain, as we now move our time frame, you can see the mountain moves out and then it moves back as well, like so. Then we're going to do the same with our wave. So we're simply going to right click on that, say we want to create a classic tween, and so now as we move, because we also did a resize, you'll see that the wave is resizing as we move it across, and then as we right click here and say create a classic tween, it will resize back to its original position. Now the reason why we want our start and our finish frames to be the same is because this is going to loop, and if we got to frame 90 and it didn't look like the start, when it looped it would jump all the way back to frame number 1 and it would look a little bit dodgy. So if you push this little loop button here, then you can preview your animation by pressing the play button. Oh, except I've got the little animation, that's a little gotcha. You can see I've got the little loop just playing that, or I had the little loop just playing those first 5 seconds, whereas now my preview, if I turn the loop on and I actually expand my loop out to the point I want to loop, the whole 90 seconds, when I press play, you'll see it now moves out and then back between those keyframes. And because I've got the loop turned on, it's actually going to continue looping through those animations. Now you can resize your images, you can change color of images. It's actually better if you wanted, you can see I've got my yellow objects here. If you wanted to change the color, it would have been better to do that originally in Illustrator, and that would then allow you to import the objects into Adobe Animate while they're still black rather than having a yellow animation. But for the purposes of showing you how to animate this, it's worked well. So give that a go and hopefully you will also be successful.